important that you're aware of the different stages of clay. I'm also going to be testing you on these stages and the clay's properties for the duration of the course, because I find that it's a valuable piece of knowledge. And also, clay and chemistry go hand in hand. So I loved chemistry for that reason. I've been working with clay for 13 years. I've been making glazes and experimenting with different clay bodies for about 10 years. So I really nerd out on this subject, and I'm super enthusiastic about it. So you'll see that when I'm talking about it. I love what I do. So I want you guys to absorb some of this, and I won't be testing you on this stuff until after we make the first project. And that's because when we use our hands and experiment with a new material, it tends to go into the working memory based on motor skills and how that aligns with our brain chemistry. So I asked you to have your notebook or sketchbook, something to write with and something to write on. When you have that in front of you, go ahead and type ready into the chat. Joma, I got you. I saw that you might have been getting some supplies, or maybe you just didn't hear your name, but I got you on attendance. Don't worry. Okay, waiting for another 9 of you to confirm you're ready in the chat. So if you joined late, or maybe you missed me saying this, how do you get credit for the notes? So some teachers do it differently, but what I do is I have you guys screenshot your notes. So either screenshotting them with the computer or with the phone, or scanning them, whatever works, and sending them to me so I can check that you have all the notes, and then I'll give you credit. So I use one language arts component. If you've taken my class before, you know I'm really consistent about this. I find that when we're organized in our note taking, it's easy to go back and reference notes, and you are going to be taking some quizzes where you can use your notes, and that will be super resourceful if you have them organized. At the end of the lecture, I'm going to plug in the slide number. So if I move too quickly, anytime you see this icon that says notes, you'll know that I want that note in the sketchbook for this lecture, okay? All right, so the language arts component that I use to keep organized is called the MLA format. I did this all through college, and I find that it's valuable in an arts class to keep our visual notebooks organized. So go ahead and take down MLA information, writing your name, my name, the course name, today's date, and your title for this entry, what is clay? Once you have that down in your notebook, type MLA in the chat to confirm. Thank you, Mary Sol. Let's take about a minute to get our MLA information set up for this entry. Once you've got it, go ahead and confirm in the chat, type MLA. While we're getting that set up, I'm going to text Hema for Joseph, Moses, and Jilma for picking up clay. All right, all set. Okay, we're gonna move on. Again, if I go too fast, you can always come back to the lecture. Let me show you where it's at under the classwork tab. So in order, boom, right at the top, and lecture attached. So if you need to go back and record notes, if I went too fast, you can always do so. All right, so every single type of clay, there are many, many, many different types of clay, is found in the Earth's crust. So in this region, particularly in California, we have a white clay body that is more prominent. So you're going to find white clay more in this region, depending on where you are. So the clay that I gave you is Venus white. And if you were in Mexico, you would probably find a red clay, also known as terracotta, because it's local to that area. If you were in India, you would probably find a yellow clay body known as speckled buff, which has a lot of grog in it, which means it's a really sandy, rough clay. If you were in China, you would find a porcelain clay, super pure, pure, pure white clay body, actually the best clay in the world. It's porcelain. So with that being said, the definition of clay is a natural material that is formed in the Earth's crust. Once you have the definition of clay written down in your notebook, type clay in the chat. Once you've got the definition of clay, go ahead and type clay in the chat. And everybody's typing into the chat because number one, it helps me move at a fluid speed. And number two, it makes me know that you're paying attention. So as students who are taking a ceramics course in America, we're pretty lucky because you go to the high school and you pick up the clay and it's ready to go. But for example, if I was living in India, it depends on the area, right? And I needed to make bowls for my kitchen because I don't have access to the dollar store or Target or Walmart or Pier 1 Imports or wherever I'm going. So I would need to go down to the riverbed, harvest my clay. I would need to dry it in order to mold it and shape it at a certain consistency. I would need to build a fire to fire that clay instead of using an electric kiln that I have plugged into the wall. So maybe those individuals aren't students with the luxury that we have, but clay is a course, I think, in my opinion, of course, as your teacher, it's taken for granted because it is such an extensive process to make clay. And we just get a 25-pound bag ready for you. So I want you to understand what goes on behind the scenes. And that's what today's lecture is going to cover, as well as how does clay transform as we start to mold and shape it. So when it's wet, when it's fresh out of the bag that you get and you untwist the tie and you open it up, it's ready to use. It is easily molded. You can form it into different things and the consistency is there. You don't have to worry about shards of glass or pieces of scrap material down by the river. You just get it ready for use. And there's three main ingredients that make it so easy to shape, mold, glaze, and all of that. So those three ingredients are found on the periodic table, and this is where the chemistry comes in. Are alumina, silica, and feldspar. So again, three main ingredients in clay that are super important. Alumina, silica, and feldspar. Go ahead and write that down and put the number 2 in the chat once you got it. go ahead and write down the 3 main ingredients of clay. And once you have those 3, go ahead and put the number 2 in the chat. So I used to sit on the 7th floor of the San Jose State Library when I was going there for my ceramics credential. I loved the way that it smelled. The books were so old up there. Nobody ever went up there. And there was a section up there that I would just sit in and eat my lunch if I didn't get in trouble and read the books. And up there, there was a whole section on different clay bodies, different styles of working with clay. But what I loved about it is how it's an age-old practice. It dates back 12,000 years. And still, archaeologists today are digging up pieces around the world that they find and putting them into museums to determine the quality of the clay, the craftsmanship, especially with minimal resources. But even dating back to those time periods, these 3 main ingredients still existed. So clay becomes less fragile when it's heated at high temperature. So we're going to be molding and shaping different things. I gave a lesson at my house this week, and I had a girl come over who got a wheel for Christmas. She's not one of my students, but she was a student in this regard. And we sat down at the wheel and we made this bowl. This is her bowl. Maybe about 5 days ago, she made it. Now, she was really worried about handling it when she took it off the wheel because she didn't want it to crack. It seemed really fragile. So I told her not to worry. I'm going to fire it at a high temperature to drive out all that extra moisture. And when she gets it back, ready for glazing, it's going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit of a different color, but less fragile because that heat drove out all the extra moisture. So you can see the picture up at the top. This is 2,300 degrees firing those pieces of ceramic ware. And it's molten hot, which means those pieces are bright orange. They're not on fire, but practically, right? Now, once the kiln cools down, they change a little bit in color and they're either pink or white, depending on the clay. So let's look at the 3 main ingredients in their raw form, how we ground them down to a little powder, and let's talk about why each one is important individually and how they come together as a collective whole. So number 1 is alumina. There are 3 main ingredients in clay: alumina, silica, and feldspar, but alumina is the top ingredient. Our clay bag has the highest content of alumina in comparison to the other 2 ingredients. This is what it looks like in its raw form. We grind it down to a little powder and we add it to the clay. So I want you to write that down. Alumina is the number 1 main ingredient in clay. When you have that in your notebook, put the number 1 in the chat. Alumina is the top ingredient out of the 3 in our clay bag. Once you've recorded that note, put the number 1 in the chat. So what does it do? Why is this ingredient so important? And why do I want you to know? Let's take a look. It makes the clay malleable. The word malleable also means plastic. So when you open that bag of clay, this ingredient allows you to mold it and shape it when it's wet without it falling apart and crumbling into pieces. So it's kind of like a molecule that works as basically a thread to keep the clay intact and allow it to be molded and shaped into a form you desire. So go ahead and write down that second bullet point about the clay's property, alumina. Once you have it, go ahead and put the word plastic into the chat. So because of alumina, we can make super cool forms. We can design dishware. We can make decorative pieces. So you'll hear me say that word a lot, especially next week. And that's why I'm going to wait to test you on this information until after we're done our first project. Because when you hear things and you're actively doing, like I said, it allows things to make more sense. These terms stick with us. Once you've got the second part of the definition for alumina, type plastic into the chat. All right, let's take another 30 seconds to wrap up that note. All right, moving on. The next one, silica. This looks like a quartz crystal. It comes in this form, super pretty. So if you've ever been down by the riverbed, you're walking through a river and the sand kind of sparkles through the clear water. That could be two things. That could be silica, that could be mica, and if you're super darn lucky, it could be a third thing, gold. But pretty rare we find gold in the riverbeds that have been mostly panned during the gold rush. So yeah, that super sparkly ingredient in its raw form could be traces of silica, and we find that often down by the river. So silica is found in the Earth's crust. It can be also found in gravel, sand, and soil. And what does silica do? Well, silica is a binding agent. It allows things to stick together. So when we make this ceramic glue tomorrow during our lecture, you're going to be able to see the properties. So for example, look at my screen for a minute. I threw this cup on the pottery wheel. And then I took a handle that I made by hand and I attached it to the cup so that it would function, right? I could drink my coffee out of it. Now, if I didn't have a high content of silica in my clay and I didn't have a ceramic glue, once this form dried, these two pieces would fall apart. So thanks to silica, silica in the clay helps clay molecules bind together. So it works very similarly to alumina, but alumina makes the clay more plastic so we can shape it, and silica allows those pieces to stay together for the duration of construction. So I want you to write down the definition of silica. Once you have that, type silica into the chat. Okay, let's take about 30 more seconds to record the definition for silica. Silica serves as a binding agent to allow clay molecules to hold their shape and stick together. All right, So when we have silica in the clay, the more silica that we find in a clay body, like for example, I told you China has the purest clay in the world. It's called porcelain clay. So if you ever see a white clay, that's porcelain. And our toilets are made out of porcelain. So the more silica that we find in a clay body, depending on the region, the more pure that clay is. So I want you to think about this. If a clay is really white, that means it has a high content of silica. So a red clay doesn't have very much silica at all, which can make it hard to work with. So for that reason, we look at purity by the level of whiteness in a clay body. So toilets are super, super strong. Silica also strengthens because the more silica, the more that those materials are going to bind together. So we think about two things when we think about silica: strong because of the binding agents, and the color, very pure and white. So let me ask you this fun fact. This will be fun. Let's take a little guess. Everybody has a toilet in their home. I don't think that you probably ever thought about it unless you've taken my class before when you do your business every day, that it's made out of porcelain clay. But they're also able to hold a lot of weight. In pounds, how much weight do you think a toilet can hold? Think about that for a minute. And then once you've got a number in pounds, type that number into the chat. How much weight do you think a toilet can hold in pounds? Jussie says 1 ton. Okay, let's see what other people say. How much weight do you think a toilet can hold in pounds? Go ahead and type a number in the chat. Okay, we got a ton, we got 550 pounds, 800 pounds, 600, 500, 2 900s, 450. What else we got? 700. I feel like I'm on The Price is Right. 500, 700, 1,000. Okay, let's wait for a couple more people to chime in. Just fun, wild guess. Any last takers? 900, 50. Think about how much we weigh as humans. We're not breaking the toilet. It's got to be more than 50. All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look. Okay, if you got anywhere close to this number coming up on the screen, 1,000 pounds is the average weight a toilet can hold. So 1,000 pounds, that's a lot of weight. So if you were anywhere close to that number, ding, 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 you were on to something. So toilets can hold a lot of weight, and that is determined by the clay body, right? Porcelain clay has a lot of silica, making it a really strong clay and a really pure white clay. So fun little fact there. All right, let's look at the last ingredient. This is my all-time favorite, and this is where Masai nerds out super hard. Okay, at San Jose State, where I went to school, they have one of the best ceramic programs in the entire state. People come from a lot of different places to go to school for a master's in fine art with an emphasis in ceramics, because their facility is insane. And they have every single ingredient you could ever think of to make the most beautiful, rich, vibrant colored glazes for your ceramic ware. So this little watermelon, my little pitcher holder that I have right on my desk, super bright, super vibrant, 4 different colored glazes there. And that is due to a material, an ingredient called feldspar. And feldspar comes in many different colors based on the composition. So on the left side, we see a rock that almost looks like a rainbow, an iridescence. There are some glazes out there that have that rainbow vibe. It's called, let me think about this, rutile. On the right side, we see another version of feldspar, and this growth on the right side, super, super bright turquoise. So we get all kinds of approaches to glazing, and this is where I have so much fun. I took a class at San Jose State all about how to mix glaze ingredients with different percentages of feldspar. And I'm going to show you a little tile here. This was my favorite result. So this is a clay body called Speckled Buff from the region of India. And the tile, you can't even tell the clay color, is glazed with a mint green and a lavender color. And these are two different glazes I overlapped by putting them in a spray can, almost like spray paint. And I was going for something earthy that looked like lavender, that reminded me of my garden. So really fun. And I won't nerd out too much. I won't get too sidetracked. But feldspars are rocks that grow naturally in the earth, and they're a combination of alumina and silica growing together. So there's different ratios of it. There's different colors. So I want you to write this down. Feldspars are made up of a combination of alumina plus silica equals feldspar. So we can get all different types of aesthetics based on the type of feldspar we're using. So go ahead and write that down. Once you have feldspar, type the word feldspar into the chat. So feldspars are made up of alumina and silica, and there's different ratios that you can mix to get different colors and different results. So there was a teacher before me who taught in ceramics, and she had a little bit of a different background than me. When I came to campus for the interview, I was still in college. I was still going to San Jose State. I hadn't finished yet. And they wanted to hire me part time. And they asked me a few questions. And one of those questions was, do you know how to make glazes? Apparently, the teacher before me was buying all the glazes, which are so freaking expensive. But this was something I loved to do. So I said, yes, yes, and more yes. I love to make glazes. So when I first came to the campus, we had 6 colors. Now we have 15 different colors. And when we fire those at a high temperature, 2200 degrees, the feldspar melts. And depending on which glaze you've applied, you get a different result, forming a glass-like surface and making that product nice and shiny and ready to use. So I want you to write that down as the second part of the definition. When feldspars are fired at high temperature, they melt and they form a glass-like surface, revealing a finished product. Go ahead and write down part 2 of feldspar and put the number 2 in the chat once you have it. So writing down the second component of that definition and putting the number 2 in the chat once you got that recorded. So I had a couple students last year actually that loved making glazes for me. I want to teach that skill to kids who want to learn it. One of them was Bobby T. I think he graduated. Yeah, he did. He graduated a year early. And William Bravo, who's a senior this year. Both students who wanted to learn how to make glazes. So that was pretty awesome. There were a few more, but those two individuals helped me the most. Maybe you know them. All right, I see almost all of you have gotten that definition, waiting for 8 more people. All right, so when that feldspar starts to melt, which is another word for the word flux. You don't need to know that term, but that's a fancy word for melt. So when it starts to melt at that high temperature, you've applied the glaze. I'm putting it in the kiln to reveal that beautiful glass-like surface. Those particles bond together, and the heat helps them to cure. And that's why they're so shiny when they come out. And the color, it looks so fresh and so rich. And that's due to the feldspar melting and those clay pores shrinking together. And then we get, boom, these types of results. So the one on the left here is 2 different types of glazes overlap. So in certain areas, you get these cool combinations of colors. The one in the middle, this is hand painted. So the artist refined the color and also made it a little more detailed by painting it on a white clay body. The one on the right, the artist added the navy blue first, and then they painted the turquoise over the top. So you see some little peekaboos of color coming through underneath of that navy blue. There's so many results, and I would say opening a kiln after I've glazed everything is better than opening a Christmas present. This is so much fun for me. And my boyfriend loves to be there when I open up the kiln to reveal those shiny products. He loves to see the smile on my face. So I'm excited for that day to come for you when we finally finish the first project. All right, so I'm going to pause right there and I'm going to ask you a couple questions. There are 3 main ingredients in clay. Which one is the number 1 ingredient out of those 3? Go ahead and look at the list on this poll and respond to the question. What is the top ingredient out of those 3 main ingredients? Okay, waiting for 7 more people to respond to that poll. 5 more people. 3 more people. Two more people. All right. I'm going to share the results of this one. It is anonymous. All right, so 79% of you said out of the 3 main ingredients in clay, alumina is the number 1 ingredient. It has the highest percentage. You are exactly right. Alumina is the ingredient that makes the clay more plastic so that we can shape it into many forms. Silica is one of the main ingredients in clay. So for those 5 of you that said silica, it is a main ingredient, but it is not the top. Silica helps the clay molecules bind together. So when they start to dry, the form does not fall apart. Okay. All right, so I don't want to freak you guys out or anything, but I do want to bring this to your attention because I think it's important. I've been working with clay for 13 years. So I have some worry about my health and also my respiratory system, right? Silica is an ingredient in clay that, when inhaled over long periods of time, I'm not talking a week, a month, 5 months, I'm talking years of inhalation. It can be harmful to your health, and it could cause a disease of the lungs called silicosis. I wear a mask when I mix glazes. I wear a mask when I sweep the floor or when I'm doing any cleanup that has a lot of clay dust. Now, you could be exposed to silicosis in other forms than working with clay. If you're on a construction site, if you sandblast something, maybe you work as a mason laying tile. If you're demoing a house and you're demolishing it and rebuilding, there's a lot of silica and debris in the air. If you manufacture glass or metal products, if you're a plumber, if you're a painter, and you'll notice the symptoms are shortness of breath, maybe some blushing in the skin. So again, not trying to freak you out, but just letting you know that you want to keep your work area super tight and clean. You're not going to get silicosis over the course of ceramics, but if you are a clay practitioner and you want to pursue ceramics for a longer period of time, you got to be really, really cautious about taking care of your workspace. Okay, so just wanted to make you aware of that. All right, let me see here. 6 stages of clay. I want you to write that down. 6 stages of clay. Once you have that, and that's going to be a title, we're going to go over each stage. I want you to type the number 6 into the chat. And we're going to take a little pencil break after that. 6 stages of clay. You can underline it. You can put it in all caps. So go ahead and take down this title, 6 stages of clay. Type the number 6 in the chat once you've got it. So a lot of people think when they've never taken a ceramics class, you're going to open the bag of clay, you're going to make something in a couple hours, and then you're done. Unfortunately, it's a little bit longer of a process than that, but the process is extremely rewarding. It is worth waiting for. And students get super psyched when they reach the last stage. And we're going to look at all of them individually. And you're going to be getting used to me saying these terms. I'm going to say them so much, they're going to come so naturally to you. Starting next week, you'll be hearing these more and more often. So before I get into the 6 stages of clay, I want you to see the process of how clay is made and how it gets into those bags that you have at home ready for use. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that that clay is plastic and ready to work with. Those binding agents of silica are fully functioning, and those feldspars in the glazes are totally revealing that bright, vibrant color. So I'm checking on time. We're right on schedule and gonna play this video. Take a look.
The origin of so many useful things is somewhat muddy. It's in everything from bricks to tiles to dinnerware. Clay is a component of soil that, when wet, has a certain plasticity. This allows it to be shaped into hundreds of things, including the kitchen sink. There are many shades of clay. The whitest is the purest and used to manufacture things like dinnerware, sinks and tiles. Clay isn't just dirt, it's one of the most valuable resources we have. Here they excavate topsoil and gravel to find it. They dig as far down as 24 meters. The deeper they go, the whiter the clay. Fresh from the earth, the moisture content of the clay is between 15 and 22%. The particles of clay clump together, but they can easily be broken up. The clay will now be processed to a workable form. They unload it in a building without walls, so it will partially air dry. They do a visual inspection of the colour and consistency. Every few loads, they also do a chemical analysis of the mineral content. And this allows them to categorise the clay for specific purposes. Next, they transfer the clay to a revolving tub. The tub has knives that protrude up into it. As it spins, the knives hit the lumps of clay to chop them into smaller pieces. These smaller clay chunks flow out of the chopper and are moved to a hopper. The hopper feeds the clay to a mill. En route to the mill, the clay travels through heat, a flame generated by a furnace below. This is called flash drying, and it brings the moisture content down to 1 to 2%. The right consistency to now grind it into a fine powder. The grinding mill is a shaft with numerous hammers sandwiched between steel plates. As the shaft turns, the hammers swing to grind the clay lumps into a powder. The mill will also blend different kinds of clay to create specific products. The cover is closed and the mill is set in motion. The hammers pulverize the different clays into a powder. Overhead, a machine sucks up the ground clay using spinning blades and a vacuum. The cyclone effect lifts up the clay particles and leaves heavier impurities like sand behind. The result is a purer clay blend. Here are various clays, now dried, pulverized, and purified. They run numerous tests on the clay. For this one, the technician presses the clay powder into a cake-like disc using a hydraulic press, at the same time weighing it. Weight can indicate the clay's pliability and the speed at which it can be cast. He fires the clay disc in an oven overnight and examines the colour to confirm that it's the correct hue. Over at the packaging station, a worker hangs open bags on spouts, which fill the bags full of dry powdered clay. The end user will add water and other ingredients to turn this particular blend into a glaze for items.
All right, so wow, so much until you can get it in the little bag and use it. So that was a large site making a crazy amount of clay, more so not geared to sculptors like you and I, but geared towards big products like toilets, sinks, tiles, and these sorts of things that you see going into homes that are being built. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So regarding clay's purity, let me ask you this question from the video. How can you tell that a clay is pure? Let me see. Did I include that one? I might have not. You know what? I did not save it, so you're clear, but let me ask you that in the chat, actually. I am going to ask that question. How can you tell a clay's purity? What is the main thing that you can look at and see to determine if a clay is pure? Go ahead and type into the chat. What do you think? What determines a clay's purity? If I looked at a clay body, what would I notice just by looking at it without touching it that the clay is pure? Okay, good. Excellent, Moses. Very good. Yes, so as I'm seeing that come in, yeah, the color of it. Is it white? The whiter the clay, the purer it is, the higher content of silica. Yep, how bright and white it is. Good, good. I missed that question on the poll. Oh, don't want to play it again. All right, so we have, let me check the time, about 10 minutes left, and I hope to get through these next 5 slides. Before I do this, I just want to remind you that tomorrow we are going to be working with clay. So I know a couple of you are going to be getting over to the school this afternoon, Joseph and Jilma. I've already let Hema know. She'll be waiting for you, so I'll give you about 45 minutes to get over there after class. We're going to look at the 6 stages of clay. Tomorrow, we're going to make stage 1, slip. Slip is a watered down clay that we take and use as a ceramic glue. So when I put a handle on my cup, or when I put a decorative handle on my casserole dish, I use slip to make sure that it sticks. Stage 2, plastic. You can open up that bag of clay I gave you, and you can easily mold and shape clay right out of the bag, making it into the form of your taste. Stage 3. This is a little bit past leather hard, but this bowl was constructed about 5 days ago, and it's getting a little hard. It's holding its shape, and this would be a good time for me to start carving designs into the clay and making it a little more personal with unique touches. Stage 4. I've made the piece. I've attached everything. I put designs in the leather hard stage, and now it's time for me to let that thing get bone dry. And this is when the clay becomes very fragile. And that way, I let it dry, put it into the kiln, and drive out all the rest of that water. And that brings me to stage 5, bisqueware. After I've fired it one time and I've extracted all the water, the clay shrinks a little bit in size and it's ready for glazing. So at that point, you're going to choose your colors, you're going to apply them, and make sure that you get an even consistency. And then I fire it a second time. And after that second firing cools off, your product is finally done. You see those feldspars really igniting and seeing that rich, vibrant color. So I want you to write down stage 1 under your 6 stages of clay, slip. Water plus glue equals slip. A ceramic glue you use to join pieces of clay together. Go ahead and write down stage 1. Once you've got those 2 bullet points recorded, type slip into the chat. Water plus clay equals slip. Slip is a ceramic glue. So when we make this tomorrow, why are we making it on a Friday when we're not going to use it till next week? There's a couple reasons. We want the clay to have time to get soft into a pancake batter-like consistency. So the image on the left, this is what we're aiming for, and it takes time to set up. So we make it, we mix the water and clay together, and we wait a few days, and we go back and we mix it up even more. So we have a glue-like consistency. Once you've recorded stage 1 slip, type the word slip in the chat. Okay, let's take another 30 seconds to get that one into the notebook. And you guys have been doing so great and been being such good listeners and staying right along with me. I appreciate that. Definitely want to prime you before we get into the studio. So when I'm saying these terms, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. If for some reason you miss some of the notes, remember you can always go back and record the notes that you'll submit for credit. All right, stage 2. You open up that bag of clay and you cut a piece of clay out. The clay is soft, it's workable. You can easily mold it into a form or shape of your choice. And we want to keep the clay plastic for the duration of the course. So in order to keep that clay plastic in the bag, we need to keep the bag sealed tightly when we're not using clay. So make sure that you're sealing your bag when it's not in use to keep it in the plastic stage, stage 2. Go ahead and write down plastic and the definition associated and type plastic into the chat once you got it. Once you have the note, go ahead and type plastic in the chat so I know you're ready for the next steps. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. Leather hard. I had so many students obsessed with this stage last semester. I don't know if it was from just being locked up inside all the time during COVID or being sick of using the computer or watching too much TV. I don't know. But during the leather hard stage is when you can really personalize your work by carving, stamping, indenting, removing material. So here is a bowl that I keep on my counter. This is pretty similar to what we're going to make. It's just a lot larger than the size I'm going to have you make. I made this by hand, and I don't know if you can see that. At the leather hard stage, when the clay was a little bit more firm and it wasn't so fragile and plastic, I took my loop tool, which is in your kit, and I started carving these chunks out all along. And then when I go to glaze it, those carvings really, really are emphasized by the glaze because the glaze distributes differently when you have texture that you've carved or indented. So leather hard is fun. This is when you can really get into the process and carefully carve and make designs that are unique to you and personalize the piece. So go ahead and write down leather hard and type stage 3 in the chat once you have it. Okay, let's take about 30 more seconds to get that one in. So the clay's holding its shape. You have thought about a design, you looked up ideas, and now you're carving and you are adding your own personal touches. So when you are done making, I'm going to have you bring me your project to the school in the leather hard stage. And that's because it's not super fragile yet. If you let it dry past the leather hard stage, and it'll take time for you to figure it out, but it's like leather. Leather holds its shape, it's kind of stiff, but also you can move leather around. Stage 4 is just after leather hard. That is when you have let your project completely dry out. It's fragile. It's really easy to break. We haven't put it in the kiln yet. And so I have you bring it to me before this stage because in transportation, you could easily break the project. I don't want to freak you out on that regard too, but we try to be as careful as we can when bringing projects to the school, and we don't want them to get too dry to the bone dry stage before we load them into the car. So go ahead and write down stage 4, bone dry. That's clay that's completely dried. It's ready to be fired. It's fragile. And at this stage, there's nothing else we can do to the clay. We can't add clay. We can't carve. The clay is dry as a bone, and it's ready to go into the kiln. Go ahead and write down stage 4. We've got about 5 more minutes, folks. 2 more slides. We're almost there. Okay, let's take another 30 seconds to get that into the notebook. Go ahead and confirm in the chat. I know you guys are nearing the end of the class, and I just want to make sure that we all got it down and we're ready for tomorrow. All right, stage 5. You brought your project to me at the high school. You've made it. You've carved it. I let it dry out, bone dry. You want your clay project to be dry as a bone before it goes into the kiln. If I put wet projects in the kiln, I'm going to explode the projects. So I need to wait until they're dry. So normally you bring them to me and I let them sit on a shelf and dry out for 2 days, maybe 3. Then I put them into the kiln and I fire them at a high temperature, 2300 degrees. At that time, they become molten hot and all the extra moisture and water is evaporated from the clay. All the clay's pores shrink and that silica helps those molecules bind together. And then from there, I'm ready to glaze. My clay is a little bit more white in color. It's also a little bit smaller because of all that water being evaporated. So, Bisqueware, stage 5. Go ahead and just write down the first bullet point. Just the first one. Clay that has been fired once and is ready to be glazed. Once you got that, type stage 5 in the chat. Just the first one. It's a lot easier to handle things too. They're not as fragile anymore, especially because we fired them. It's almost like curing something in the oven, right? Once you got stage 5, type stage 5 into the chat. Almost there, folks. Almost there. Okay, now's the fun part. So for the first project, I'm going to glaze it for you. For the second project, I'm going to send you home with glazes. So you're going to get your project back after I fire it the first time. And they call that bisqueware, right? I've bisqued it. I've made it less fragile. And I've made it ready for you to apply the glaze. Stage 6, you apply the glaze. You paint it on, you highlight that texture, and then I fire the project a second time. So you got to bring it back to me again. It's a lot, right? But it's worth it because then we get that beautiful product at the end that we made from scratch with our bare hands. We're proud of it. We're participating in something unique. Each piece is going to be different than your neighbor. So glazeware, stage 6, last and final stage. We finally made it to the end. Clay that has been painted with glaze and fired a second time, revealing this beautiful, vibrant, rich color, this glass-like surface thanks to the feldspar, and now it's ready to be put on a shelf to stare at and admire, or it's ready to be used as a mug or a bowl. Once you got stage 6, go ahead and type stage 6 in the chat. All right. So it's 2:50 on the money. I know that you guys are itching to go, but I got our class started 5 minutes after our scheduled time. So we're going to be meeting at 1:30, giving you a little bit extra time for lunch. So I'm going to run till 2:50. Not every day, but sometimes on lecture days. Great job today. You guys are crushing it. So let me just give you a couple reminders. Have your studio and supplies ready to go tomorrow. For the first half, we're going to take notes. Be sure to finish the homework, confirming you set up your studio space or any concerns you might have around that by completing the Google form. Also, you have a homework assignment going into the weekend, responding to the 6 stages of clay. So you can start on that, but it's not due until Sunday. The primary focus is getting your workspace set up for tomorrow. So go ahead and type bye into the chat, and I will see you mañana.
Miss I, sorry I was late. I'm gonna be jumping in from another class to your class.
Oh yeah, no worries at all. Just let me know if you ever feel like you missed anything, if you have questions.
Okay, no worries. No, it was really good. It was a really good class, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Lecture days are hard, so I try to make it fun if I can.
No, yeah, definitely. We'll see you tomorrow, probably around the same time. I'll log in with you guys.
Okay, sounds good. And I'm recording the lectures from here on out, so I'll be uploading those to the post for each day. So if kids need to go back and watch from your group, they'll be there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Richard.
My grade, I joined your class late and I didn't have time to do the work. So I was wondering if you would give me some time so I could complete the work.
Of course. I was looking at your slideshow. I'm like, with such a diligent student, there's a reason why. And now reminded me, I remember that you joined just last week, right?
Yeah, the last day to join another class.
Okay, yeah. So why don't you just take time through, let's say this coming Tuesday, which I think is the 2nd of February. Just take all the time you need this weekend and Monday to get caught up.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for checking in.
Yes, bye. Have a good day.
You too. Bye. Alejandro, did you have anything you wanted to share or any questions for me?
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a student support.
Yeah, I did know that. And I'm not sure. I'm going to check with a student real quick before you and I talk. Adrian, did you need any help at all? Okay, I'm just going to remove Adrian. If I can. Who are the students in the class that you're supporting for this section?
Yeah, it's his first name is Caden, I think.
Okay.
And I already talked. I sent him an email.
Okay.
And you should know. So I was taking notes today for him. I don't know if he was here. I didn't see him. But I was taking notes.
He was here.
Oh, okay.
Yep, he was here today. And so great. Does he have the ability to take notes, or he just needs more support there?
I think he just needs support, like in general.
Okay. So same thing I just told Maria, I'm recording the lectures from here on out. So if you do need a student to go back and